This week's reading is from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. This week's reading, activity versus inner communion. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week, we contemplated the well-known story of Martha and Mary. Traditionally, this story has been offered to show the two classic approaches to salvation. The first, through action, and the second, through prayer. The excuse of the Marthas of this world has always been, the church needs its Marthas too. Treatises, moreover, have been written to justify the Martha approach to piety, praising her self-sacrifice as perhaps an even higher demonstration of devotion. Thus do the unmeditative in religion try to justify themselves. Yet the fact remains that Jesus rebuked Martha. Elsewhere, moreover, he spoke of the virtue of feeding the hungry, curing the sick, and housing those who were homeless. It wasn't that he disapproved of serving people. Wrong attitude was the object of his criticism. What he was criticizing was forgetfulness of the true goal of right spiritual action. Good deeds outwardly, without inner communion with God, will result in good karma, but will not bring final freedom from all karma. The path to inner freedom has been described by Paramahansa Yogananda in these words: be always calmly active and actively calm. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 2nd chapter, he who is not shaken by anxiety during times of sorrow, nor elated during times of happiness, who is free from egoic desires and their attendant fear and anger, such a one is of steady discrimination. Do your duty in life, so counsels this great scripture elsewhere, but never lose sight of him to whom all actions should be dedicated. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Good morning, everyone. Big day today. It's good to see Krista here. Your house is still standing. That's good. She had a fire code or something that they might have to evacuate. Maybe that's why the rain came today. It was just for you. And it'll clear up just for the dedication. So there. So the subject is activity versus inner communion, but of course the description is about activity with inner communion and inner communion. We never want those two in juxtaposition with each other. We want them together with each other. And there's a classic tale in India that I can't help but recite. Forgive me if you know it. But it's the one about Shukdeva, Shukdev, I guess, is probably how it's properly pronounced, who was the disciple of a great king who was also his guru. And he was with the king in his palace, and the king wanted to put him to the test. He was a young man at the time. And he gave him two oil lamps that were in the shape of bowls. And he told him to put them in the palms of his hand, lit the lamps, and then to walk through the entire gigantic, gorgeous palace, room by room, and come back to him and not have spilled one drop, and to look about him as he was going. And so Shukdeva did that, and the king sent along 2 of his staff to keep filling the oil lamp as the lamp was burning it down, so it would always be full to the brim. And so Shukdeva went, and it took him about 2 hours. And it was very, very difficult, very challenging to be able to walk perfectly centered and still like that. And he came back to the king, and the assistants of the king who went with him verified that not one drop of oil was spilled in the palace. And so the king said, "Fabulous. Now Shukdeva, describe to me all the rooms and everything that you saw in detail." And Shukdeva says, I couldn't possibly. I was so focused on not spilling the oil. And the king said, "Well, then you haven't quite passed the test. Go again. And this time, don't spill any oil again, but make note of everything that you see in all the gigantic rooms and halls of this great palace." So he went again, and this time it took him 10 hours. And by the time he made it back to the king, he was calm, and he was centered, and he was able to tell the king, describe to the king everything that he had seen in all the rooms of the palace. And that's the art of communion, inner communion, in activity, in service, to be able to keep that one-pointed focus on our inner divinity, on God, thereby reflected also in everything and everyone we see in all circumstance. And at the same time, totally 100% engaged in the duties that we have in life, in our activities. And that's quite an art. That's the trick of it. It's both and, not either or. I'm meditating, no, I'm in activity. It's infusing the activity with our meditation, with our one-pointed focus on God. And it's no small feat. I've often thought, or I especially thought yesterday when I was contemplating this, Yogananda has a number of meditation techniques that are preparatory for Kriya Yoga, and done also even after we've received Kriya Yoga and practiced that. And some of those techniques require 2, sometimes even 3 things to be happening at the same time. You know, concentrating here, listening here. I'm not going to go into the techniques right now, but we're doing a number of different things. And for most everyone who does this, tries this, it's very difficult, and you wonder, why is he giving us more than one thing to do in this meditation technique? And I realize in part it's in preparation for exactly that, to be able to be focused and still doing at least 1 or 2 other things in our practice, so that when we're actually in activity, we can be focused and doing many things at the same time. Swami Kriyananda, Yogananda's direct disciple and Ananda's founder, tells a story of living with Yogananda, and Kriyananda and a fellow monk were asked to plaster one of the outside walls of a building. So they were mixing the plaster with water, just little batches, and it would dry up really quickly, so they'd have to put it on quickly, and then they'd do another batch, and so on. And when they had just mixed a batch, Yogananda came out of the building and called them over to him. And they thought, uh-oh, this is going to become really hard, this plaster. But of course it was their guru calling them, and it was a special opportunity to be with him. So they went, and he engaged them in a conversation that ended up lasting about a half an hour. And Kriyananda says somewhere in there he was thinking, oh my God, it's going to be like cement when we get back there. And after about a half hour of spending time with Yogananda, they went back to their task, and the plaster was still soft. And they were able to put it on, and then it dried up and became hardened. And so it is with us. We think, well, I can't possibly do all these things and meditate. I don't have time for that meditation. I'm not going to get everything done unless I just get to it this time. I just can't make the time. And yet we realize that when we start off making that inner contact, that God contact, and then bring it into our activity, bring that experience of our divinity and that contact into our activity, we're able to do 10 times what we thought we could do, and more. And miracles can happen. The plaster can stay soft. We just have to be open to trying that and then watching the miracles happening around us. I remember thinking when I was, doing my meditation and serving at Ananda, and then we had our first child, and it's like a 24-hour around-the-clock experience. They're like little invalids when they're infants. They're just helpless, and you need to do everything for them, and they eat way too often in the night. Mine were little, and so they ate a lot in the night, and you're just totally occupied with them around the clock. And I would think, I can't possibly do one more thing. And then I'd get pregnant with the second child, and you find out you can do one more thing. And you can still keep your practice going. It may not look quite the same for a few years, but it comes around and it can still be there. It's just a question of making the time and seeing that without that centered calmness at the center of the storm of our activities, we're just like little, rolling off the flywheel. We don't stand a chance. And especially in today's society when there's so much going on at the same time. So finding that center is crucial. I remember years ago we visited Ananda Assisi. We did so many times through the years. And on one occasion, a few of us went to Laramie, which is the place where St. Francis used to go in the mountains, in the caves, to meditate and seclude with his brothers, the friars. And one of our friends had arranged that one of the friars there, one of the monks there, would show us around, give us a tour. And so this young man came to us, and he was wearing the robe of the friars, but he just had a very worldly vibration and sort of looked to me. The sort of in-hip sandals of the day that were very expensive he was wearing, and his hair was sort of perfect in place, and and he was showing us around, and he said, in the days of St. Francis, he encouraged the friars. He would take half of them and ask them to pray and meditate, and he called them the Marys. And he would take the other half and send them off to teach in the villages and towns nearby, and they were the Marthas. And he'd have the Marthas pray for the Marys, and then they'd have them switch roles. And then, the ones that were praying got to go out, and the ones that went out got to stay back and pray. But he said, it's just not practical anymore, so we just don't do that. What a missed opportunity that was, You know, it's a perfect teaching. It's a perfect way to try to experience both and then eventually being able to assimilate both. It's very, very important. Our son is visiting us right now. He's here with his little baby today, so I think they're probably downstairs. But I remember he's in his late 30s now, but I remember when he was a little guy, maybe 7 or 8, we were camping with them. We had a daughter and a son. And at one point, we were throwing the ball back and forth to each other, you know, out in front of the tent in the open space, playing catch. And at a certain point, he said, "You know, Mom, if you didn't have us, you guys probably would never stop to play." And I thought, well, he really caught us. Because God is joy. And in God there is no tension. David came back, you know, calm after he got what he was supposed to be doing. And, you know, he could sense that, you know, we were work, and not taking the time to play. If there was anything Swami Kriyananda tried to teach us, he was incredibly productive. Over 400 compositions of music, over 150 books, communities, lectures, on and on and on. But he would know when to stop and when to play, and he'd always make us come and watch the same old movies with him over and over and over. You know, Bambi and Sword in the Stone, you know, I have them all memorized. But it was like, stop, enjoy, smell the flowers, you know, be present. So what is it? You know, there's a couple of things that I can think of. There are many, I'm sure, but that keep us from remembering the stillness of God inside of us while we're in activity. And the first, of course, is our own restlessness. Yogananda in his autobiography calls it the oscillating mirrors of our minds, you know. They're oscillating so much like this that we can't see clearly. If we could see clearly, and this is what he was telling one of his college friends when he was describing that friend would have seen Sri Yukteswar present right in that moment, but he couldn't see him because his mind was going like this. And that's how we are most of the time. So practicing meditation is so key and important to the ability to be still and know. It's so essential to practice stillness and silence so that we can have that experience first and then take it. The second one is moods. Yogananda calls moods thwarted desires, or he defines them as that. But basically, we have a tendency to have a lot of thwarted desires, and so we get moody around those, and then we just, you know, sort of this darkness sets in. Kriyananda describes walking down the hall when he'd been in a mood, and he passed Yogananda, and Yogananda said, "How are you?" And Kriyananda started to answer, "Well," and he goes, "Well, that's great." He just didn't give him a chance to go down that road. So catching ourselves. Yogananda recommends we actually catch the desire before we have it, just as it's starting. But when it's thwarted, trying to catch ourselves and grab ourselves from getting into a mood. I know when I was younger and going through my female cycles and things like that, I could feel them coming on sometimes, and I'd just make Riemann take me somewhere. Get me out of here. Give me some fresh air. Let's do something. Break the energy and sort of pull ourselves out of those kinds of moods, because in that gray cloud, we can't possibly see the light. The oscillating mirrors and the darkness or grayness just obscure the light. So today we go out and we bless the yoga hall right after this service. And yoga helps us prepare the body for meditation. It stretches us into stillness, it keeps the body fit, and it helps us. It's difficult to sit still in a long meditation if our body has aches and pains. And so it's such an important aspect of, especially in America, in the West, in our culture, anywhere in the West, not just America. But we live in such a fast-paced society. To still that body and to be able to then experience really the silence in meditation, which this temple represents. We go into the yoga hall, we come in to the temple. It's like a complete package. We're so blessed to have now both of these beautiful, exquisitely beautiful buildings to house these great activities of yoga and meditation. And so as we go out there to celebrate and dedicate, let's remember to listen for that divine song that's just beneath the surface of everything that we're doing.
I'd like to read this brief reading from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda. Father, teach me to be actively calm and calmly active. Let me become a Prince of Peace, sitting on the throne of inner poise as I direct my kingdom of activity.